Having me, and Victor, I'd like to extend my welcome to the United States. One thing I want to say here is we need to get you a better looking shirt. When it says Carolina, I want it. Much better. So what I'm going to talk about today is, the title slide is the global economic outlook. I'm really going to focus kind of on the macro U.S. Economy, and probably more importantly for your purposes, where we think it's going to be going over the next year or so. So Richard, if you can man the slides, I appreciate it. Next slide there. So here's the economy today. I mean, the best way to think about it, at least from a broad sense, would be in real GDP growth. And as you probably know, the economy is in an expansion right now. A lot of people don't know that because it's kind of sluggish. But GDP bottomed out over 3 years ago. It's been growing consistently, albeit slowly, ever since then. And then those green bars are our forecast going forward. This will get you out to the end of 2014. And so if you're defining recessions by negative GDP, then you can see that we don't have a recession there. Now, I can certainly think of ways that you get there. I'll talk about some of these as we go through. But our base case forecast here is for continued growth in the United States. I could give you numbers, and unless you're an economist, if I say 1% or 2% or 4%, it probably doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to you. I mean, other than probably the larger the number is, the better it is. So I think the way to think about it is, to think about over the last 10 years, and we've essentially had 3 episodes. We had 2003, 2007, which was pretty much a boom. We had 2008, 2009, which was very much a bust. And then we've had the last 3 years or so, too, if you excuse me for using a technical economic term, it's been kind of right? So, when I think of the next 2 years, 2.5 years, which of those 3 episodes is most likely? And we would put the biggest mass of probability on that continued kind of okay? There's some things that are wrong in the economy, and I'll get to these in just a second, that we think are going to provide some headwinds here to growth. But I'll also let you in on a little secret here. Economic forecasting is more of a educated guess than it is anything. So, I could give you hard numbers, but I wouldn't put a whole heck of a lot of weight on those numbers. So what I'm saying here is, I'm going to give you our baseline, but I'm going to also tell you about some things that could cause the baseline to be a little bit too pessimistic. Maybe things turn out to be stronger than we think. And I'm also going to talk about some things that could turn us back into another recession. Okay? Because I think you always, as you're trying to plan, you're trying to get a sense of, what are things that could go wrong here or better. Okay, so why do you have this kind of continued sluggish sort of grind? Next chart, please. So this is the arithmetic. Can you go back one? I'm sorry. Right. Oh. There we go. Okay, so this is the arithmetic reason. So this is our forecast now for consumer spending. Okay, this is in real terms, and again, you see positive bars. I can give you some numbers. 1.5 to 2%. I know it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot to you. So just kind of benchmark this versus history. Look at 2003 to 7. Okay, so back here, real consumer spending was growing roughly 3% a year, and we think going forward it's going to grow 1.5 to maybe 2% or so. Okay, and so the reason this is the arithmetic answer is this is 2/3 of your economy. 2/3 of the economy kind of grows slowly. It probably means the whole thing does. Okay. Now I realize that doesn't give you any intuition. So why is that growing slowly? Next chart. Let me show you 2 charts here to kind of get a handle of that. So this first chart here, this is household debt. This is measured as a percent of disposable income. Some people will refer to this as a measure of leverage. And you can see that over the last 2 decades or so, Americans definitely got levered up, particularly in the last decade, with the housing boom or housing bubble. Okay, now, right now, as you can see that line is coming down. Arguably, though, it can continue to come down further. Okay, and people will ask me a lot of times, so what's the magic number? What's it have to go to? And I'll be quite honest with you, I don't know what the magic number is. I don't know if anybody knows that, or if, in fact, there is one. But when I look around the economy today, I don't see a lot of signs of people wanting to get all levered up again. I don't see a lot of signs of Americans holding up their hands and saying, hey, can I get a little bit more debt over here, please? The only area of consumer debt that's really growing right now is student loans. I think that kind of makes some sense. Outside of that, look at credit cards, look at mortgage debt, all that's growing very, very slowly. So we think this deleveraging is probably going to continue, and in the long run, that's good. But in the short term, if this deleveraging continues to occur, and the way it occurs is people have brought their savings rates up, and so that kind of provides the headwinds on that consumer spending growth that I was just talking about. Okay, another chart that's related to this. So next chart, please. So now I'm showing you, this is household net worth. So what's included here would be, essentially it's everything. It's the equity you have in your home, and your stock and bond portfolios, your checking and savings accounts, everything, okay? And you can see that back in late 2007, that got as high as close to $70 trillion. Then things started to blow up, and by early 2009, we were down to about $50 trillion, okay? Now you can see we retraced maybe 2/3 of that, but the point here is there's some people who still have some holes in their balance sheets. The stock market has more or less come back, okay? But obviously in many parts of the country, house prices, which is one of people's biggest assets, those remain depressed. So this is another reason for us to expect this, kind of slow grind in consumer spending as people continue to try to repair their balance sheets. Next chart. Okay, in terms of where we are in terms of employment right now, there's good news and there's bad news here. The good news is that since employment bottomed in February of 2010, you can see that what we've created, the private sector has created a little bit north of 4 million jobs, which sounds pretty good, until you recognize that, well, we lost 9 million back during this period here. Okay, so we're not back to halfway yet. Okay, that's why the unemployment rate still is at 8% right now. Now, you can see these numbers do move around on a monthly sort of basis. So if you say, all right, since February of 2010, if you just average these bars, what you find out is the private sector is creating right now about 130,000 jobs per month, 135, okay? And so if you compare that to 2003 to 7 time period, back here we're doing about 155,000. And then back here in the 90s, it was even stronger than that. I think it was about 180, 190. Okay, so we're creating jobs slower than we were in these last two expansions, at least at this point. But here's some upside potential for you. Okay, believe it or not, as it relates to this. Here, the upside potential is, if you were to say to me, tell me 5 good things about the U.S. economy. Okay, one of the things that I would say, I'd put it in the top 5 for sure, if not maybe the first one, would be the financial health of the business sector today is very strong, very, very strong. Okay, so what that means is businesses don't have to lay people off, and they're really not right now in any great detail. Okay, and so what you see here also is we've had 2 episodes of a number of months where the private sector was actually creating jobs over 200,000 per month. Okay, now here's the potential. Going forward, we think we're probably going to continue around that average, about 130, 135 per month. And if that's true, then that unemployment rate comes down, but it comes down pretty slowly. If we can go back up to 200,000, if the business sector starts to really ramp up job creation here, this thing can really start to get some wheels in the sense of, one of the things I think that's holding consumers back right now in terms of confidence is they don't have confidence that if they lose their job tomorrow, they're going to find another one. Back in 2006, if you lost your job, you cried about it for about 10 minutes, and then you said, okay, I'll find another job, and 2 weeks later you were working. Okay? Today, people don't have that confidence, and so what that means is they really like to have a new car, because they're still driving that 1999 Chevy that's sitting on their driveway, but they don't have any confidence that, or they don't want to go out and take that new monthly mortgage or car payment. Okay? But if the unemployment rate starts to come down a lot faster than we think, and people start to say that the labor market's stronger than we believe, then there's a lot of pent-up demand for big ticket items like cars and refrigerators and houses and that sort of stuff. And this thing could really start getting a lot stronger than we believe. Okay, so if a year from now, GDP grows 5%, which is not our forecast, but if it does, and you invite me back and then you all laugh at me and you say, man, you were too bearish last year, I would say, well, refresh this chart for me. I just want to see if we were right in terms of our employment growth. Right? If this turns out to be a lot stronger over the next year, then we're going to end up having a lot stronger expansion for the next year than what we believe. So that's some upside potential. Next chart. Kind of related to that would be, here's our forecast, or you can see where we've been in terms of business fixed investment spending over the last few years. Last year was pretty darn strong. We're starting to slow down a little bit here. As we go forward, we're still projecting positive growth in business fixed investment, but mid-single digit sort of things. And so the upside potential, again, as it gets back to the businesses again, they're financially very healthy right now. If they invest stronger than we forecast, then overall GDP growth is going to be higher. Okay, now, put this in perspective, this is only 15 to 20% of the economy. It takes a lot of this to make up for the consumers, okay? But that could give you a little bit of a lift, okay? One other place where we're seeing, one other place where we are seeing, believe it or not, recovery. I mean, these two words haven't been used together in a long time. Recovery and housing. We're actually kind of seeing something. Now, so here I'm showing you family starts, housing starts, single and multifamily. You know, an optimist would look at this brown line here, which is single family starts, and say, oh, we're trending upward. You know, maybe if someone's a little more realistic would say, yeah, but over the last 2 years it's essentially flat. And clearly, relative to the peak, we're still down about 70%. Okay? But where you are seeing a recovery going on, and keep in mind, we're still below levels that we had a few years ago. But it's this blue line right here. And this is the multifamily sector. This is apartments. Okay, so what's happening is, you know, people have been burned by single-family houses over the last number of years. Okay, they've got to live somewhere, so where they move, they're moving into apartments. So if we're seeing some strength, and I use that word loosely, in the housing market, it's really in that multifamily space. And this is also helping to, you know, boost the economy a little bit at this point. Richard, get the next chart, please. Okay, so that's where we are in terms of the economy. In terms of inflation, where are we right now? I mean, if I had to use one word, kind of Goldilocks. Not too hot, not too soft, not too cool, just about right in terms of inflation. I don't care how you measure it. If you look at the overall rate of inflation right now, which is the blue line, in August that was up 1.7%. That's nothing, right? If you take, you can see that blue line is very volatile. Right? Because why? Oil prices are very volatile, as are food prices. Right? You know, oil prices go up 20 bucks a barrel, and they come down 20 bucks a barrel. You know, tensions in Libya go up, they go up 20 bucks, and down 20 bucks. Food prices, we all know what's happening in the Midwest. What's happening with raw food prices, pushes those things around. So sometimes we look at what's called the core rate of inflation. That excludes food and excludes energies because they're so volatile. And what we're just trying to do is we're trying to get a sense of where's the underlying inflation trend. And this is about 80% of the goods and services. When you throw out food and energy, that's your brown line, and that's also 2%. Right? So we just don't have inflation. And that's why the Fed did what it is doing right now. So it's a very, very stimulative policy because they have two mandates. Right? The first mandate is price stability, and the second mandate is full employment. And they look at that first mandate and they say, well, we've got that licked. We don't have an inflation problem, and we don't think we're going to have an inflation problem. The second part of their mandate is certainly full employment, and it's hard to argue with full employment. We got an unemployment rate of 8%. Okay, so that's why they took interest rates down to zero, and next chart. And quite frankly, I think that's where interest rates are going to be for a while. Now the Fed has they've come out and said to us, given our forecast, we think we're going to be at zero interest rates until mid-2015. That's 2.5 years. Right? And would I go out that far? I don't know if I'd necessarily go out that far. I mean, sooner or later, rates are going to come up. Okay, but I think what I can say to you with a fair degree of confidence is rates aren't coming up in the next year or so. You know, the only way that would change is if we're dead wrong in terms of our GDP forecast and the economy grows 5 to 6% over the next year. If it grows 5 to 6%, the Fed's going to say, you know what, we don't need zero interest rates. It's time to start taking some of that back. And quite frankly, that's probably a trade most people would make, right? They trade 6% GDP growth for, say, 100 basis points on the Fed funds. But absent that, what we've been telling our clients is, you know, for most business owners, I don't think interest rates are going to be part of their business calculus for the next year or two. We're in a low rate environment. We're probably going to remain in a low rate environment. All right. So before we move on here, let me say two things. The first would be, if I would have given you this forecast, say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2006, 2007. And I would tell you that GDP over the next 2 years is probably going to average 2%. You would have said, really? That is lousy. Right? I think it's kind of a sign of the times now. When I give this presentation, I kind of look out there and people are kind of nodding and kind of saying to themselves, well, it's not so bad. You know, could be worse, right? Yeah, well, that's where we are. It could be worse, right? So in some sense, it's not all that bad. Right? So I talked about some upside potential. What could go wrong? So let me talk about 2 things that potentially could go wrong. So you got to keep these downsides in mind. Now, before I do that, though, I know I'm going to get this question later on, so let me preempt it right now. And the question is, how does the election change all of this? Okay. And what I would say is we do not have, in our forecast, an explicit political assumption. We're not making any assumptions about the election. Maybe we have an implicit assumption. Okay, so when we went last year, this time, when we rolled out to 2013, and we knew that the Bush tax cuts were going to expire at the end of 2012, we had to make some assumptions. Okay, we said, what are we going to assume? By law, all the Bush tax cuts expire at the end of this year. And I guess we could have assumed that. Okay? But maybe we didn't want to think about the consequences of that. So what we assumed was at least some of the Bush tax cuts will expire. And that's part of our forecast, part of our assumptions. Now, is that, again, there's no explicit political assumption there. Maybe there's an implicit one in the sense of the 2 candidates for president, who does that resemble the most? And the answer is probably President Obama. Right? If President Obama is reelected, then at least some of the Bush tax cuts will probably expire. Okay. So then you say to me, okay, so that's kind of into your forecast right now. Tell me how your forecast would change if Governor Romney becomes president. Okay. And quite frankly, I don't think we would change it all that much, at least in 2013 and 14. Okay? For the first narrow reason, that if Governor Romney becomes the next president, what he wants to do is make the Bush tax cuts permanent and then actually maybe reduce them for some people. Okay? And so what would we do there? Well, we would take our consumer spending forecast, which when you look real closely at it, we have a little bit of a dip in 2013 as some of the tax cuts expire. We would boost that up. But on the other hand, looking at Governor Romney's platform, we would also tend to take a lot more cuts to government spending. Reasonable people can argue whether cutting government spending is a good thing to do in the long run or not, but I think most people would agree that if you really cut back government spending, at least in the short term, it acts as a headwind on the economy. Okay, and so what we would do, again, we'd have higher consumer spending, we'd have lower government spending, net it would probably kind of wash out. Okay? And so we wouldn't make any huge changes. And then from a broader perspective, what I would say to you is that regardless of who becomes elected president in November 6th, it's not probably going to be a Reagan sort of moment. Okay, and what I mean by that is when President Reagan was elected back in November of 1980, or the first 2 years, so what he did when he came into office is not only did they cut taxes, but government spending went up because there was a military buildup. Okay, and actually, when you go back and look at it, the recession, the economy remained in recession until mid-part of 1982. But we had very stimulative fiscal policy, tax cuts, government spending increases. At the same time, because we had that deep recession, inflation, which was double digits in the late 1970s, came down to like 3%. And the Fed then, starting in mid-82, started cutting rates like crazy. So come 1983, not only do you have really stimulative fiscal policy, but you have really accommodative monetary policy. And the economy booms in 1983, 1984. All right, so if you look at the next 2 years, is the Fed going to get any more stimulative at this point? Probably not. Right? And it's not like fiscal policy is going to turn really stimulative. If anything, it's going to become more contractionary going forward. So that's what I mean, it's probably not a Reagan moment. Okay, now if Governor Romney is elected, maybe reduce some regulations and stuff like that, and that's probably good for growth in a longer term sort of sense. But I don't see that juicing the economy significantly in 2013 and arguably not 2014. Okay, so net, how does the economy, how does the election affect that first chart I showed you, the next 2 years? Probably not to any significant degree, because our policies are completely different than what they were, say, 30 years ago. All right, so let me talk real quickly about two things that you need to keep an eye on. Next chart. Okay. The first thing is it kind of relates to this, and I kind of have alluded to it up to this point. So here's our federal deficit. This is $1.2 trillion over the last 12 months. Okay. And what this relates to, as you probably know, is at the end of the year, you probably have heard this thing called the fiscal cliff. Okay? And what that refers to is at the end of this year, three things happen. The first is, and I talked about it before, Bush tax cuts expire, okay, by law, and that's for everybody. Okay. The second thing that happens, starting actually in another week or so, fiscal 2013, which starts on August 1st, next week, is the so-called sequestration. What that is this is where government spending, budgeted government spending gets cut $1.2 trillion over the next 10 years. Half is focused on defense, half is focused on non-defense. Okay, and then the third thing that happens is the payroll tax, which is now 4%. I mean, historically it had been 6%, and then 2 years ago we took it down to 4%, and that's expected to, or is slated to go back up to 6% at the end of the year. So if you take all those things and add it up, you're looking at about 3% of GDP. Okay? And if we fall off that fiscal cliff, okay, if we're not smart enough not to do that, then remember that first chart I showed you with our forecast? Remember those green bars, they were positive? Okay, negative for 2013. Okay? We've done this a number of times. We've put that assumption into our simulation model. Unfortunately, the model never changes, so the answer doesn't change. We get a recession every time we do it. Okay? It's not a Lehman Brothers collapse recession. It gives you a recession peak to trough decline in GDP of roughly 3 to 4 quarters, and it's about 1.5 to 2% of GDP. Put that in perspective, that's kind of like 1990. Okay, it's a run-of-the-mill kind of recession, but I'm using that word, maybe I'm being a little too flippant using that word because the unemployment rate is at 8% right now. In this scenario, would go up back over to 10%, maybe up to close to 12%. So if we fall off a fiscal cliff, we're probably looking at a recession. Okay, and what's the probability of that? I don't know. I think you folks have just as much insight into that as I do. Okay, and so we'll see. We're assuming we don't. Our assumption is we have a fiscal step down, where the tightening is about 1% of GDP. You know what they say, garbage in, garbage out, right? If our assumption is garbage, then our forecast continued recovery is garbage. So that's the first thing we're looking at. The second thing is, next chart, is it kind of relates to Europe. Okay, and when I get to this part, people, I see their eyes start to glaze over, and they say, oh my gosh, not Europe again. We've been talking about this for 2 years. I don't have any business in Europe. I've never been to Europe. I never want to go to Europe. Why do I care about Europe? Okay, if you just bear with me for maybe 2 more minutes or so, I'll explain why you should care. A lot of focus has been on Greece. I'm not trying to offend anybody of Greek heritage here, but I've been saying for 2 years, Greece in a large sense doesn't really matter. I mean, for the global economy, it's just kind of too small. Okay, obviously they're going through a lot of pain in Greece, but from a global perspective, it doesn't matter. Spain and Italy are different animals. Okay, the outstanding government debt of Greece is about 400 billion euros. When you look at Spain, you're talking about 800 billion euros, and then when you look at Italy, you're talking close to 2 trillion euros. Okay, put that in dollar terms, that's about $3 trillion. Okay, you can bail Greece out. They've been bailed out twice. You can't bail out. Nobody has that kind of money. Okay. So if the Italian government can't finance itself, or the Spanish government can't finance itself, they're going to have to restructure the debt, and when you get debt restructurings, people are taking haircuts and taking capital charges somewhere. Okay, so where's that going to happen? Next chart. So what this shows you is, now I'm looking at the Spanish banking system. And so what we see here is, back here in 2008, the Spanish banking system held less than 150 billion euros of their own government's debt. Today, that has almost tripled in the last few years. The Spanish banking system is full of its own government debt. And so if they have to restructure the Spanish government's debt, the Spanish banking system is going to, I won't use this word because it's really strong, I won't say collapse, but it will, there'll be extreme financial difficulties in the Spanish banking system. Okay, why do we care? Next chart. Okay, well, we don't really, indirectly, but these guys care. Here's France and Germany, okay? As you can see, the French banking system has a ton of exposure to these 5 indebted countries, about $550 billion, and the German banking system is right behind it. So if the Spanish banking system, fill in the word, not collapse, but something really bad, happens in Spain, it's going to cause a very deep recession in Spain, which is then going to have ramifications on the French and the German banking systems, which are very, very large. Next chart. Okay. And here's the U.S. banking sector, this is the exposure of U.S. banks. This is to all of Europe now, not just the peripheral 5 countries, okay, which are kind of showed by these Carolina blue bars. Okay. But when you add all of our exposure up to all of Europe, you stack these bars on top of each other, you get about $700 billion worth of exposure. Okay. So here's the chain reaction. The Italian and Spanish governments can't finance themselves. You're looking at restructurings, which is going to cause the collapse of the Spanish banking system or the German or the Italian banking system, which is going to cause a lot of pain in Germany and France, which affects our banking system. Final chart. And the way it affects you, even though you've never been to Europe, you never want to go to Europe, the way it affects you is through this chart right here. This is called LIBOR. Okay? And what you see here, you see this spike right here? That's called Lehman Brothers. Okay? Maybe you never heard of Lehman Brothers up until here, but you knew what Lehman Brothers was, because suddenly your borrowing costs went through the roof. As the global financial system ground to a halt, interest rates went flying up. And that's what gives you, in part, our deep recession. And in the last 2 years, that's first Greece, here's second Greece. These are like mini bumps, but remember, Greece doesn't matter. Spain and Italy does. Spain and or Italy have the potential to become another Lehman Brothers. Will that happen? Probably not. Okay. They are slowly making progress over there, but the operative word is slow. And Europe is not fixed at this point. Okay. I don't think it's going to blow up, but I don't say that with a great deal of conviction either. Bottom line, what does it mean for business owners here in the United States? If you assume that we don't fall off a fiscal cliff and Europe doesn't blow up, then we're probably okay, right? It's not great, but we're probably okay. We'll probably continue to grow. Okay? But what I would say to you, business owners, would be, I think caution is probably still advised. I'm not telling people to jump into foxholes and duck and cover. Okay? I mean, that was good advice back in 2008, 2009, and we're not in that situation. But there's a lot of uncertainties in the world. Okay? And so what we've been telling our clients is, we're not telling them not to do deals, not to expand their businesses. We're not telling them that at all. What we're saying is, be cautious. Do your homework. Do your diligence. When you're done doing your diligence, do it again. Dot your I's, cross your T's. Keep your fingers crossed, and enjoy 2013. Thank you.